Hello and welcome to lecture number 33. This is topic 2.22, Gender and Resistance in Slave Narratives. The first learning objective is to explain how enslaved women used methods of resistance against sexual violence. Sexual violence against enslaved women started in the Middle Passage as they were being transported from West African ports to the West Indies, South America, and even directly to the United States. White enslavers and traders justified this behavior, first by claiming that the women were property and so therefore no crime was being committed, but they also claimed the black women were more promiscuous and so therefore welcomed the advance. Once this continued on plantations, it disrupted emerging black families in North America because black men were unable to protect their wives from constant sexual exploitation. This also disrupted the families because children were often conceived during these instances of sexual exploitation, creating half-siblings within the family. The constant threat and reality of sexual violence were used as tools of control and dehumanization by enslavers as well. Rape laws that were passed across the United States were not applicable to enslaved women, as the law saw them as chattel property. If anything, the law only found ways to extend the institution of slavery. In 1662, Virginia passed a law that any child born to an enslaved woman would inherit her status, ensuring the perpetuation of slavery through generations. In 1855, a Missouri enslaved woman or child, who was 14 years old at the time, killed her white enslaver after being raped multiple times. When her lawyer defended her in court, attempting to use the statute that allowed women to protect themselves from rape, the all-white jury still ended up convincing her of murder. Enslaved black women had to resist sexual abuse in other ways. Sometimes there was fighting and physical violence, other times they used plants and abortion-inducing drugs. This intergenerational knowledge sometimes even had African roots. This was a form of resistance because women who were being impregnated to produce more people to increase the wealth of the enslaver would give up trying to impregnate enslaved women after several failed attempts or what appeared as miscarriages to the enslaver. In the Caribbean, enslaved women would often use herbal knowledge passed down through generations to resist pregnancy. Tragically, some women also practiced infanticide, meaning they killed their baby as soon as it was born. They were able to do this without detection because black enslaved women often had more complications in birth than their white counterparts. The reason for this is that they continued to work all the way up until labor, and they received inferior food and nutrition, so their children were already, on average, being born at more unhealthy levels than white children. If the woman killed her child after giving birth, it could be covered up as a stillbirth. Finally, running away with children was particularly hard because sometimes women had more than one child, and keeping a child quiet and cared for during an escape attempt was difficult. It could also give away the attempt at escape. Women who did this had to make the difficult decision of possibly taking one child and leaving others behind. Sojourner Truth had to do this whenever she escaped slavery. She had given birth to 5 children over her lifetime. One had died in childbirth, the second was conceived after an act of sexual assault from her enslaver, and the other 3 were the result of a slave marriage. When she ran away, she took her youngest with her and later tried to retrieve her oldest son. The second learning objective is to explain how gender affected the genre and themes of slave narratives in the 19th century. The slave narratives we're discussing should not be confused with the Federal Writers Project and the Works Project Administration's project by the same name. In that instance, the federal government hired writers to conduct interviews with people who were born into slavery and then attained freedom as a result of the Civil War. Those interviews were conducted in 1935. The slave narratives we are discussing here are the individual stories of people who were born into slavery and then found their way out. These slave narratives describe first-hand accounts of suffering. There's a general plot common to all of these, and it starts with their initial enslavement or being born into slavery, describing their family, then moving to describing the enslaver home or plantation, the typical type of work they were supposed to do, the treatment they received, possibly setting that up as a reason for their escape. The next part involved describing the clandestine methods of leaving the plantation and the dangers that awaited them in trying to find refuge, and finally, their life as a free person. Notable examples include Olaudah Equiano's narrative, which provided a detailed account of his journey from enslavement to freedom and became a powerful tool for the abolitionist movement. We see various methods of escape in slave narratives. They range from the conventional methods of running away in the middle of the night to Henry Box Brown's narrative, in which he shipped himself in a box placed on a railroad car. Another unique method was used by William and Ellen Craft, where Ellen disguised herself as a white male planter traveling with his slave, William, to escape to the north. Other narratives describe how they acquired literacy. Frederick Douglass famously described how he tricked other white children into teaching him how to read while spending time with them on the docks of Baltimore. Not all enslaved people wrote their own narratives. Sometimes they were dictated to a writer and then published by an anti-slavery society. The slave narratives also emphasized the humanity of the enslaved people to help advance the political cause of abolition, often highlighting the hypocrisy of the enslaver. Sometimes the enslaver tried to maintain an image of Christian piety, but their continued exploitation of other people highlighted that hypocrisy. Slave narratives written by enslaved women had some differences compared to those written by men. They reflected the 19th century gendered norms, focusing on domestic life, modesty, family, and the constant vulnerability to sexual abuse. This reflects the common roles that black women had. They were more often domestic servants, wet nurses, cooks, but they also did some physical labor. Of course, at any point, the women were in danger of being raped by the enslaver or the enslaver's son without much recourse. Conversely, the narratives written by enslaved men sometimes emphasized their autonomy and their manhood. The last learning objective is to explain the impact of black women's enslavement narratives on political movements in the 19th century. The two political movements we want to stress here are abolition and feminism. Ending slavery is the common theme across almost all slave narratives. We see that clearly in the history of Mary Prince, a West Indian slave published in 1831. She was born in Bermuda and sold across various Caribbean islands. Ultimately, her enslavers took her to England after they had abolished slavery there, so she took her own freedom after she arrived and made a case for why she deserved her freedom. Another important slave narrative is Harriet Jacobs' Incident in the Life of a Slave Girl, published in 1861. This is the first one written by an enslaved African American woman herself. She shows elements of abolition and feminism because of the fortitude she had to endure as both an enslaved person and a woman. In her escape, she didn't get very far. She actually ended up hiding out for 7 years in her grandmother's home near her enslaver's plantation. She hid in a crawl space, or what she calls a garret, just so that she could stay close to her daughter. Ultimately, she made it to the north but continued to live in fear of recapture because of the strengthened fugitive slave laws. And finally, to recap, laws against rape did not apply to enslaved African women. African American women resisted as best they could. Slave narratives described first-hand accounts of life under slavery, emphasizing the humanity of enslaved people. Specific gender norms were present in slave narratives by men and women. Black women's narratives advanced the causes of abolition and feminism. These narratives were instrumental in garnering support for the abolitionist movement, as they provided personal and emotional accounts that highlighted the brutal realities of slavery. Thank you for watching. If you would like to watch the next lecture, click the thumbnail on the screen. And if you would like more resources to help you study, you can visit apushslides.com/afam. I wish you the best of luck with your studies, and I hope to see you back on the next lecture.